video game consoles are pretty cool. But what if you made them look different? Hello everybody and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be going over video console redesigns. Obviously this is the PS2 and the PS2 Slim, probably one of the most famous video game console redesigns, but we'll get into these consoles specifically in a moment. So first up, we're going to go through why you'd redesign a video game console in the first place, and we'll go through all the history of the console redesigns, the most famous ones, maybe some lesser known ones. Well, actually, all of these are pretty famous. But yeah, I just want to set some ground rules here. We're not talking about redesigns that are for like different regions, such as like the NES and the Famicom, which I may talk about a little bit, just so I can explain it to people that don't know the difference. But we're not talking about that. We're not talking about special edition consoles, although I do have a special edition console in this video because it's the only one I own. And we're not going to be talking about redesigns that added functionality. So we're not talking about things like the Twin Famicom or the Panasonic Q or the PSX or anything like that was another version of the console that added functionality. So without further ado, let's first start off with the NES and the Famicom. Basically, for those of you that don't know what this is basically the Japanese version of the NES, or should I say the NES is really the American and European version of this. It was redesigned for the video game Crash, now to look like a video game console. The NES was redesigned to look like a VCR and function more as a toy, so that people wouldn't think it's a video game console to the video game Crash. So they didn't want to release the Famicom since it looked exactly like a video game console, whereas this looked like a VCR, I guess. I mean, yeah, I don't know. This thing's always it's a little weird. I always see this as a video game console, but I guess at the time it could look like a VCR, and it came with Rob the Robots with the toy. But anyway, that's a topic for a different video. But yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but the NES/Famicom actually do have a redesign. It's not as known. If someone says NES or Famicom, they're gonna think of these two things. They're not gonna think of this thing. And just to be clear, all the redesigns we're talking about today are first-party redesigns that are designed to, well, with the exception of one, but it's not a real redesign today. But with the exception of one, they are all designs that are designed to replace, one another. They're not, a different model that changes functionality and sold alongside. It's a model that is meant to replace. And this was the redesign for the NES. And I didn't mention it, but I meant to. The reason you redesign video game consoles is because you want to make them cheaper to produce, either so you can lower the price or increase your profit margin. So in this case, this is the NES so-called top loader. It was released in 1993, obviously way after the NES was released, and even after the Super Nintendo was released, since that was released in 1991. It's also called the AV Famicom in Japan. It basically looks like this, except this part's flat, not rounded, but it's basically the same design. But yeah, basically it was a cheaper, lower cost version of the NES/Famicom. Basically, for the American one, it actually took away the composite port, and for the Japanese one, it actually added composite support. Mine is modified though for RGB video out, which is what the switch is for as well. But here you would actually have an RF port, the channel 1 and 2, channel 3 and 4 switch, and the AC adapter. And this is modded. So yeah, but on the AV Famicom, which is the Japanese version of this, it actually added AV support because the Famicom only has RF. So they actually added a multi-out port, which would only support composite video. But yeah, it actually also allowed for detachable controllers on the AV Famicom, because you can see here the Famicom controllers are actually built into the system. You can't remove them, but on the AV Famicom, this is basically the same design as this. But it did not come with the original NES controllers, the square ones we're used to. Both the AV Famicom and the top loader NES came with this controller, which I guess is supposed to be like the Super Nintendo controller. I don't like it. I think it kind of sucks. But yeah, they both came with this specific controller, not the square one, which is, I know this is a Famicom controller, but not a NES controller, but basically the same thing. You see, the buttons are oriented a little bit differently. I don't like this one, but yeah, not a lot of people know about the NES/Famicom redesign, but here it is. It's sort of superior. Oops, sorry. It's sort of superior in a few ways, being a top loader, meaning this doesn't break the 72 pin connector is much less likely to break due to the top loader nature. It's much easier to use Famicom to NES adapters, and it's the only way you can use a Famicom disk system that's not on the Famicom or AB Famicom. It's the only North American system that that can use the AB Famicom. So this is why I actually had this one modded for RGB, since this one could play Famicom disk system games. Unfortunately, I don't have a Famicom disk system, but I do want one at some point, and this is how I play it. I wouldn't play it on this because I only get RF. This has RGB out, and it's also more reliable, and I don't have to worry about breaking this. It also doesn't have the 10 NES chip, meaning it is region free, but for reasons I'll get into in a different video, you don't really want to be playing European games on here anyway. But yeah, this is actually my main NES for playing NES games now. I don't use the toaster, as I've heard it called, much anymore. I pretty much use the top loader, since it, again, more reliable, less likely to break, and it has an RGB out that I modded to it. So yeah, that's probably the most obscure redesign, or maybe the second most. It's probably about the same as the one we're going to talk about, which is the Super Nintendo redesign, which is also known as I think it's called the New Style Super NES officially. In Japan, it's called the Super Famicom Junior. I don't have either one of them, unfortunately. I have both a original Super Nintendo American and a Super Famicom. I didn't bring them out because I didn't really feel it would be useful, since I don't have the redesigned consoles. So yeah, basically it's just a cheaper version of the Super Famicom or SNES. How much to it? You can definitely just tell it looks cheaper. They both remove RGB video out, but it's pretty easy to mod back in. I don't know why they removed it. If it's that easy to mod back in. Basically, just a cheaper NES or Super NES/Super Famicom. Not much to it. Only thing that's different is the Famicom Junior/Super NES controller just says Nintendo. It doesn't say Super Nintendo on it. I don't know why they changed that. But yeah, those are the only two like console redesigns that are like redesigns that Nintendo's ever released, with the NES and the SNES. The N64 and the GameCube basically never had more than internal revisions, although the GameCube did have a slight revision where it removed the digital video out port. But yeah, I mean that's a pretty minor thing in my opinion. It's not really a redesign. That's just like an internal change. They made a Wii that removed the GameCube support later on, and of course they did have one more console redesign with the Wii Mini, but that was such a limited release, and I think it was only in Canada for a while. So I don't know. The top loader NES and the redesigned Famicom redesigned Famicom, as well as the Super NES and the Super Famicom. Those are about the only two like real console redesigns I consider. The Wii Mini was barely released. Again, I think it was only in Canada. Wii Mini was that weird Wii that was like one thing. It didn't have a slot load, and just had like a top loader, and it didn't have any online support. So yeah, that was just sort of like a weird thing, but I don't even remember seeing it in stores. So I don't know. It's just yeah, those are the only two like home console redesigns. Well, I'm not gonna count the Switch Lite as a redesign because that's a different type of thing that's designed to be a dedicated handheld. That's me like a separate product. But I would say the Switch OLED is a redesign, since it's basically the same form factor and just has a better screen, but I guess it's sort of like an upgrade, so it's not really a redesign, but I guess you could consider that. But yeah, in my opinion, in terms of home consoles, Nintendo's only had 3, if you count the Wii Mini, 3 redesigns ever made, and that was for their home consoles at least. For the NES/Famicom, the Super NES/Super Famicom, and the Wii Mini. So those are the only ones that Nintendo's really done, which when you start looking at other game consoles, you'll figure out that's pretty unusual. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the Nintendo ones. I actually forgot to talk about the Atari 2600. This is the redesigned Atari 2600. I don't have the original one, unfortunately. This is the only 2600 I have. Basically, it was designed just to be a cheaper 2600. I think it came out way after. I forgot this thing existed. You can see actually when it sells the plastic, and actually, no, we'll rip it off together. But yeah, basically, I think this was released way after the 2600. Basically, just a cheaper 2600. I think it still has the, actually, it does, actually, oh, yeah, it does not have the black or white switch like the original does. It does have the bit difficulty A and B, and the controller ports are on the back like the original. But yeah, it's basically just a cheaper 26. Oh no, here's the color black and white switch. So yeah, you know, no lost functionality, just a budget redesign that was released well after. Probably also trying to modernize the 2600 to make it look much more newer. Same controller, nothing different really. But yeah, I guess we could peel off this sticker here. Ooh. I'm sure this is sacrilegious to some people, but peeling off, like, what is this, 40-year-old plastic? Very cool. But yeah, just this 2600 redesign, not much to it. So on to the Nintendo handhelds. I don't know why I didn't grab them, probably because it's full. But basically, the Game Boy was released in 1989. You know, it's a pretty big chonker. They released the Game Boy Pocket in 1996, which is basically just a smaller, thinner Game Boy, which uses 2 batteries instead of 4. It has this like black screen instead of the green screen. And in 1998, they also released the Game Boy Light in Japan only, which is basically just a Game Boy Pocket with a backlight. It's the only original Game Boy to have a backlight. Game Boy Color stayed the same in 1998. That never got a redesign, although in my opinion, the Game Boy Color is sort of like a new 3DS type of situation, since it did have a lot of like backwards compatibility with the Game Boy, and I think the processor wasn't that different. So in my opinion, it's like an upgraded Game Boy versus a different console, like the GBA was. But speaking of the GBA was released in 2001, and the GBA SP was released in 2003. Obviously, it changed to a clamshell design and removed the headphone jack, added a rechargeable battery, and added a frontlit screen, later a backlit screen as well. So yeah, I have them. I don't know why I didn't bring them out. Probably because I have so many other things to discuss, and I didn't think it would really be worth it. I could probably just explain it with pictures, since those redesigns are pretty well known. It's not a big shocker. But yeah, GBA SP to me is like the only real GBA. That's like the GBA to me. The original GBA, unfortunately, is sort of kind of crappy just due to the fact it doesn't have a backlit screen, although there's mods you can modify it to do that. But yeah, and you know, moving on to the next Nintendo handhelds, the DS was released in 2005. Pretty much immediately in 2006, the DS Lite, which to me is the DS. The original DS to me is this weird abomination. The DS Lite to me is what I think of when I hear like the original DS. It was released in 2006. That's pretty much the DS version that everyone I knew had. I didn't know anyone with the original DS. I didn't even know there was a different DS until later on in life. And eventually the DSi came out as well, which is, you know, more of an upgrade than a re-release. But the DSi came out in 2009 and the DSi XL 2010. And then with the 3DS, we got the 3DS. In 2011, we got the original Nintendo 3DS. In 2012, we got the 3DS XL. I guess a redesign, but more of a different console. And then, of course, the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL in 2015. So, yeah, that's pretty much all the Nintendo stuff. Sorry, again, I didn't bring out the handhelds, but I don't even have each version of that, so not much to compare. But yeah, Nintendo redesigns are more on the handheld side, but you know, usually the handhelds at least are the redesigns of the more common variations as opposed to you know, the home consoles where the original version is the more common variation. But anyway, yeah, that's all the Nintendo stuff, and now we'll move on to Sony. So, unlike Nintendo, which basically only modified the original two consoles, Sony has actually currently still re-released every single one of their consoles with different versions. So obviously we have the original PS1, I think one of the coolest looking consoles. It was released in 1994 and 1995 in America. And in the year 2000, when they were releasing the PS2, Sony released the PS1. And I think this thing is ugly. Now, regardless of my opinion on how it looks, I mean, just look at this thing is so much uglier in my opinion. This is great looking. This is not that great looking. This looks I don't know. I don't like how curvy it is. But we do have to admit, or I do have to admit, it is crazy the size difference. I mean, like, look at this. Like, how much smaller the PS1 is compared to the original PlayStation. That's crazy. I mean, credit where credit is due. This is a engineering defeat. Or not defeat, but this is a feat of engineering. So, yeah, as much as I think it's ugly and I pretty much never use it, I pretty much always use my original PlayStation. It is pretty impressive now. They did have to get rid of the internal power supply for an external one, but I think that is definitely understandable in this case. It also added a screen attachment you can get on here, which is pretty cool, I have to admit. This thing with the screen does look pretty cool, and it's, you know, kind of cool you have like a semi-portable PS1 that you can bring around and play your PlayStation 1 games on. Again, as much as I think this thing is ugly, this is probably overall a good redesign. It brings you to the original purpose of, you know, maybe having some improvements over the original design, and you know, in this case, it being the size and it being cheaper, you know, which is always a good thing. Allows more people to play the games. So yeah, this is probably one of the best redesigns in terms of like you know, practical reasons, but I think it's ugly. But as I said, Sony has redesigned every single one of their consoles, so we'll move on to the PS2. I already alluded to the PS2 redesign, but yeah, original PS2 was released in the year 2000. Pretty big system, although it has some empty space in it, to be fair. I think this bottom part is sort of empty here. But I mean, yeah, it's a pretty big system. Pretty cool looking system, I must admit. But yeah, as I said, it is pretty empty in here just because they also had this hard drive bay, which I can't pop open right now. But yeah, it's a rather large system. It's also a very loud system, which is, I don't know why I actually pretty much are the opposite. I never used the original PS2. I pretty much always use the PS2 Slim. And if the PS1 was a big difference from the original PlayStation, this is even crazier. I mean, look at this. Look at this. This is absolutely insane. Again, I had to go forego the internal power supply. But I mean, look at this. This to me is one of the best console redesigns of all time. The only functionality you use is the hard drive, but I guess you lose the link port as well. But oh boy. But yeah, to me, this is one of the best console redesigns of all time. Again, you lose the slot loading drive for the top loading drive. I guess that sort of sucks, but this drive is so loud and this one is so quiet. I definitely have no issue with that. And the fan in this console is so much quieter. It has the built-in IR, so actually if you have the remote, IR is built in, which is nice as well. But I mean, this to me is like what a console redesign should be. It keeps the spirit of the original, unlike the PS1, which does have quite a different of a redesign. Look, it keeps the spirit of the PS2 with the design and the the lines and whatnot. It just makes it smaller and cheaper and better. So to me, this is probably the best console redesign of all time. It improves pretty much on every aspect of it without sacrificing it. It still has the PS1 support. It still, for the most part, has all the features, excluding the hard drive, but it actually adds the Ethernet built in, so that's nice. Adds IR port, loses pretty much no functionality. Just a great console redesign. I think the best console redesign of all time. See, I don't hate Sony. I just don't like that the PS5 Pro is basically $800. Okay, you can watch my opinion on it if you want me to know more. But yeah, I really don't hate Sony. I don't hate the PS5. I just am disappointed with them. But yeah, we'll go back to praising them. Probably the best console redesign of all time. This is one where I definitely go for the redesign over the original. If you're gonna buy any PS2, I actually would say specifically the 7000 series PS2 Slim, because this is basically the last version of the PS2 Slim that has the PS1 hardware in it, which is better than the 9000 series, which actually does, believe it or not, there is actually a version in the 9000 series specifically that does have an internal power supply, which is crazy that they went from this to this with an external power supply. But unfortunately, it loses the PS1 processor, which some PS2 games use. And although it can play PS1 games, I believe it can. It can play PS1 games via emulation. It can't play them natively. So, and the only real advantage you get is, well, it actually gets some more gloss plastic, which I don't like. But the only real advantage you get is the internal power supply. But in my opinion, this specific version, the 7000 series Slims of the PS2 are the best ones, because you have the latest version, which means more reliable DVD readers, while still having the native PS1 support. So even if you want to play PS1 games, this is a good way to play it as a PS1 or original PlayStation. So my opinion, this is the best redesign, and this specific one is probably about the best PS2 you can get, period. But obviously Sony is still making consoles to this day, for better or for worse, mostly for better. And the PS3 came out, and they had a moment that we're now familiar with. The $600 price tag didn't sit over too well with most people. The original PS3 was this big fat thing. It was huge, had some reliability issues, not Xbox 360 level, but it did have some reliability issues. And it was expensive as hell. It actually had PS1 emulation, which all PS3s have, by the way. Even though, as I'll allude to in a second, the PS3 lost PS2 support, it never lost PS1 support, because there's always software emulation. So if you didn't know that, now you know. If you want to play PS1 discs and you don't have a PS1 or a PS2, you can do it on any version of PS3. But yeah, the original PS3 was expensive, huge, and somewhat unreliable. So they took away basically only the PS2 support, and they lowered the price from $600 to $300 and came out with this. This is also, when I hear PS3, this is what I think of. This is the PS3 I think of. I don't actually think of the original PS3, which, if you can find an original fat PS3 that plays PS2 games, you should get that. But if you don't care about, if you already have a PS2, I guess, or you don't care about PS2 support, and you just want to play PS3 games, this is probably the way to go, is this one. It's pretty darn reliable. Back in the day, they did drop the price from, $599 to $299 with this model, since it was now much cheaper to produce. It's probably the most common version of the PS3, so it's probably going to be the one you're going to find the easiest. Again, if you can find, as I said, if you can find a good price on a fat PS3 that works, that has PS2 support, get that. But if you don't care, don't want to spend the money on it, or can't find one, since this is probably the most common version, this is what you get, and it's the version I'd recommend you get for just playing PS3 games. Again, doesn't really lose any functionality. Actually, came with an option for a much bigger hard drive. I think it came with a 120 gigabyte hard drive instead of the original 60 gigabytes and then the later 80 gigabytes. So definitely a big improvement there. Still has Blu-ray support. Still can play PS1 games, plays PS3 games, but just the same. Has that with a vastly better PS3 logo. I hate the original Spider-Man PlayStation logo. I'm so happy they changed it. But yeah, probably another iconic redesign. They later came out with the super slim PS3, which has that like disc tray that goes back and forth. I don't like that one. It's like cheapy looking to me. It's cheapy feeling. If you can't get the fat PS3, this is probably more reliable in the long term, and much cheaper than that one as well. I haven't seen many PS3 Super Slims anyway, so most likely if you're going to buy a PS3, this is the one you're going to buy. Great system. A great example. It loses some functionality, but nonetheless a great example of the redesign. I unfortunately don't have a PS4 to talk about, but the original PS4 was released in 2013. It's that single one with the disc drive that you pop up on the top. In 2016, PlayStation came out with two consoles. They came out with the PS4 Slim, which lowered the price from $400 to $300. Didn't add any functionality, just became smaller and kind of a pain in the ass to clean. I don't like the ventilation on any of the PlayStation 4 models, but the PS4 Slim in particular, I think, has some ventilation issues and gets dust in it very easy. But again, it's not a bad version of the PlayStation 4. It's probably the most common version of the PlayStation 4. Still had a 500 gigabyte hard drive when it first came out, although probably by 2017, 2018, it was already at 1 terabyte hard drive. And the same year, right around the same time that came out, the PS4 Pro came out. And I've talked about it with the PS5 video. But enabled you to play 4K games. It's the version of the PS4 I ended up using in the end. I loved it. I loved my PS4 Pro. It was sort of funny because it was basically like the PS4 Slim was like two layers, and then you added like an extra layer, and that was the PS4 Pro. I liked it. Didn't have a 4K Blu-ray drive for some reason. The Xbox, even the cheaper redesigned Xbox did. I don't know why they never did that. They didn't. But yeah, I guess the PS4 Pro is a redesign. The PS4 Slim is absolutely redesigned. I guess the PS4 Pro is a redesign, but not really. 2020, PS5 came out. The original router PS5, as it's so called. Huge. Had the one with the disc and without the disc. They continued that in 2023 with the PS5 Slim. You either get it with a disc drive or without a disc drive, although if you get the one without a disc drive, you can actually add the disc drive back, which is cool. But they raised the price another $50. It's the first time a console redesign I've seen not only not get cheaper, but the discless one went from $400 with the original PlayStation to $450 with the Slim. The regular PS5 and the PS5 Slim with the disc drive both remained at $500, although the PS5 Slim usually comes with a game, whereas the PS5 originally usually didn't come with a game. PS5 Slim, I think, is a pretty cool redesign. It doesn't include the stand, which pisses me off. But I think the PS5 Slim is a good redesign. It's a much smaller console. I don't have one, and I don't feel like bringing out my original PS5. My friend has one. He likes it. Doesn't come with a stand. That's annoying. And then, as we now know, the PS5 Pro is coming out this year. That also doesn't come with a stand. It's basically a slightly bigger, dimensions-wise, PS5 Slim. But yeah, Sony has redesigned basically every single one of their game consoles to this day, which I think is, good. Although I think this generation, the redesigns kind of fell short, because usually a redesign brings a cheaper price, whereas technically the redesign brought a higher price this generation. So that kind of sucks. The OG Xbox, that was never redesigned. It was the same the entire generation, but the original Xbox 360, which came out in 2005, obviously had issues. It had many internal redivisions trying to fix it. I don't know if they ever actually did fix it with the original Xbox model. They had the Xbox 360 Elite, which was a slightly, improved version of the original Xbox 360. It was black, and it had an HDMI port. But when the Kinect came out, they redesigned the Xbox 360 from the ground up and introduced the Xbox 360 Slim, which to me is probably the best version of the Xbox 360. That E version kind of sucks. Mainly, one of the big things it did was redesign the cooling system. So this console is very much a lot less prone to the red ring of death. The cooling is much better. It has more cooling, it has more airflow, which of course is awesome. It added another USB port as HDMI, and it actually added the Kinect port for the Kinect, so you didn't have to have an external power adapter like you did with the original Xbox 360. I'll do a video on the Kinect one day, but yeah. It also changed the way that the drives work. It removed the memory card slots. If you didn't have the original Xbox 360, did not always come with a hard drive. If it did not go on the hard drive, it came with memory cards. That way you could still save your games, but you couldn't download anything. The only storage you had was the internal operating system. It didn't have any other. Couldn't basically download anything to it, and you couldn't even save games. That's why I had the memory card slots. But this one, by default, came with 4 gigabytes of storage internally. And if you wanted, you could pop this drive slot open right here and put in a drive as well. So you only had the internal drive of 4 gigabytes, which at the time was a pretty decent amount. You also could have the another internal drive, adding more storage. So honestly, I think this is a great redesign. I think it's the definitive version of the 360. Adds the Kinect support, has the most USB ports. It looks great, although I think the 4 gigabyte version is actually the best version because you can add the hard drive in anyway. And the non-4 gigabyte versions have the glossy plastic, which gets fingerprints, whereas this one has the matte plastic, which not only looks better in my opinion, it scratches much less easier and looks better longer term because of no fingerprints. So, definitive version of the 360 in my opinion, this is the one to get. They eventually came out when the Xbox One came out with the Xbox 360e, which is basically designed to look like the Xbox One and just another cheaper revision of the Xbox 360. Doesn't really gain any functionality, doesn't really lose any functionality other than component video. It still has the Kinect port, loses a USB port, but yeah, no real compatibility loss. Nothing really lost there, although this is the best version of the 360 in my opinion. Moving on to the Xbox One. Mine is blue because I have the Forza version, which is awesome. I like this console a lot. I love the Forza version of this console. I love how it says start and stop like car start ignition. And I love how on the side here it has the release date for the original Forza Motorsport. So pretty cool. But yeah, the original Xbox One, otherwise known as the VCR because it looks, I'm sorry, the DVR because it looks like a DVR. This thing is huge, much bigger than the PS4 was. Not any more powerful, actually less powerful than the PS4. So yeah, this console was redesigned with the Xbox One S. The Xbox One S is a pretty good upgrade in my opinion because not only, again, was it cheaper, it actually added some functionality. Compared to the original Xbox One, it added 4K video output. Not 4K gameplay, 4K video output. The games will still render in 1080p, and I think they're like upscaled or like just enlarged to 4K, but the games still run at 1080p or 720p or whatever. That's not any more powerful, but it could output 4K video, so you could play 4K, Netflix or YouTube or whatever. It could play 4K video, and it added a 4K Blu-ray drive, so you could play 4K Blu-rays, which again I think is pretty awesome. So not only was it smaller and cheaper, because it usually also came with a game, it actually added functionality. So Xbox One S is probably one of the best redesigns. Again, the only thing it really took away, it actually kept both HDMI ports, which I thought was weird. It actually kept the HDMI in port, which is getting really weird. The only thing it took away was the Kinect port. You had to use a USB adapter, but I don't think anyone used the Kinect on this thing. Also, the Xbox One S has an internal power supply as opposed to the external brick of the original Xbox One. And it also has a IR blaster in the front versus this one, which you had to have a IR out, which is So, yeah, pretty cool redesign. The Xbox One X is, of course, the more powerful version of the Xbox One. It's actually about the same size, not a little bit smaller. as the Xbox One S, so I don't have one with me right now. So you can see how it was smaller in comparison. They're about the same size, different design, but about the same size. And I think this one's a little bit smaller than the Xbox One S. So yeah, that was another good redesign. Sorry, the recording stopped. I was just saying that there's basically been no upgrades to the Xbox Series consoles or redesigns. There's just they added more storage and made it black on the Series S side, and they are adding a 2 terabyte version of the Series X and a diskless version of the Series X as well. No real like redesign as well. Oh, and I forgot to mention the Xbox One S Digital Edition, which is basically an Xbox One S with the disc drive removed, and I mean literally just the disc drive removed. There's just a big blank hole where it was the original model. So yeah, that basically is all of it for Microsoft's redesigns. Basically just the Xbox 360 generation, the Xbox One generation have the only real redesigns. But now we're going to move on to the extinct game developer or game console maker, Sega. The first console they released was the Sega SG-1000 in Japan. It bombed. They released it as the Sega Mark III again, which we got in America and Europe as the Master System. I don't actually have this is the original Master System. There's a redesigned Master System. It came out in the 90s. This came out in 1986. The redesign came out in the 90s. It is basically the Master System without the card slot, and it is smaller. The only reason I actually brought out the Master System is to prove that I actually own one of these things, because I don't think anyone else in America does. Popular in Europe and Brazil for some reason, but not very popular in America. NES dominated. This was sort of a rarity, so I own one, and I wanted to say I owned one. That did not stop Sega from making video game consoles. Oh, no, 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 no. Because in 1988, they released the Mega Drive, or as we know it in America, the Sega Genesis. The Genesis is a very interesting console, because it is probably about the only Sega console that had any amount of success in America. I'm going to do a video about Sega and their consoles this week, so stay tuned for that. But basically, yeah, this is probably about the only successful console Sega released in America. So yeah, this is the original model of the Sega Genesis. They did some internal modifications. One where they removed this high definition graphics, and they changed the sound apparently, removed the serial port, which was in Japan used for a modem, and they also had like a keyboard, a mouse, and sorry, not a keyboard and a mouse. They had a keyboard and a cassette recorder, so it could be like a PC, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, this is the original model Sega Genesis. They did some internal revisions. The Sega CD came out. It was originally came out. I think it was like it would sit on the top of it, and later on they came out with the new model Sega CD, which went on the Genesis on the side. It has a thing on here because it would stick out the end, but I don't have that expansion unit. When they came out with the new Sega CD, they also came out with a new Sega Genesis right here, and obviously you could tell that this was designed to be much more in line with this new Sega CD, since the vents are in the same place. Compared to the original, definitely quite a bit smaller. Apparently this one has better audio than this one, so I tend to use this one more when I'm not playing CD or 32X games. But yeah, you definitely see a much smaller re-release or redesign. Again, cheaper, like all game consoles should be. Doesn't really lose any functionality other than the higher quality audio, I guess, if that counts. But no real functionality lost. Fits much better with the new Sega CD. And I guess it has better compatibility with the 32X than the original Genesis, but I don't know. Not much else to say. I told you we wouldn't count like ones that increase the functionality, I guess, but I'll mention the CDX, which is basically a Sega CD, Sega Genesis combo that's really small, and they sold as a portable CD player. That one actually somehow works with the 32X, but it doesn't like fit. The disk drive like is too like it won't like properly work, which is weird. Like it functions like fine, but you literally can't put the CDs in. You have to take out the 32X, which I find kind of funny. They also came out, or they didn't come out with, but they also planned on basically making a Genesis 2 that had a 32X built in called the Sega Neptune. It's basically exactly what I said. It's basically just a Genesis 2 with the 32X built in. And they also had the Sega Nomad. It was basically a portable Genesis. It didn't work with any of the add-ons though, but it was basically a portable Sega Genesis that came out in 1995. So, yeah, Sega Genesis had a lot of weird shit going on. We'll talk about that in the Sega video. But as I said, pretty good redesign here. You know, much smaller and cheaper, which is, you know, basically what I think most console redesigns aim to be. Should be able to be smaller, not lose any functionality, and be cheaper. This definitely accomplished that. I also think, because this is also a redesign of an add-on, which is kind of weird. I think this is actually sort of the better version of the Sega CD, because the disc drive in this one I think is much more reliable than the original Sega CD, which I think, you know, having that tower of power, as it's so called, looks pretty cool. But especially with the original audio. But I think, especially now that these things are getting old, this setup is much more reliable than the original one. If you really want to use the original Genesis with the second model Sega CD, it will work. You have to run a cable to the back, which is weird, and it doesn't, and it, like, will fall off the edge. But I tend to just use my Sega Genesis original with, you know, normal Genesis games with the better audio, and then I use this one to play Sega CD games or 32X games. I took out my 32X for the video, but I usually like leaving the 32X in there since it's very temperamental and likes to break a lot. But yeah, sorry for going off on a tangent. We'll talk more about Sega, the Sega CD and whatnot on the Sega video. But yeah, Sega didn't really redesign their other consoles. The Sega Saturn was white in Japan and black here, but it's not really a real difference wise. The consoles look the same. It's just a different color plastic. And the Dreamcast pretty much looked the same everywhere, except they changed the logo in Europe to be blue instead of orange due to licensing issues. But yeah, that is basically all the console redesigns I remember. Let me know if you have a favorite console redesign, your least favorite console redesign. If there's anything I missed, because I'm sure I did. You know, what else you want to see? As I said, the Sega video will be this weekend. And next week will be the what's it called? Will be the regional differences between consoles, which I think was pretty cool. There's gonna be a bonus video this week, but it started becoming so complicated I decided to turn it into a main video. So yeah, that's about it. So thank you guys so much for watching. Comment, like, subscribe. Let me know your favorite console redesign, your least favorite console redesign. Did you own any of these redesigns? Did you own the original one? Just tell me what you want to tell me in the comments. Give me video ideas, and I'll see you guys this week. See you. Bye-bye.